Hello and welcome to this episode of Biz Talk. I'm Michelle Vandenberg in Beijing. On Tuesday, China released its economic data for the first quarter of 2023. The data reveals that the country's GDP grew by 4.5% year-on-year, surpassing previous expectations of a 4.0% expansion and marking a strong start to the year. This data suggests that China's economy is not only recovering from the pandemic, but also gaining momentum. Joining us today to discuss the significance of these numbers are Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novem Arcae Technologies, and Hong Hao, Chief Economist of Grow Investment Group. Thank you guys for being here with us today. Hong Hao, let's start with you. So China's GDP in the first quarter came in a lot better than a lot of people expected. What factors do you think contributed to this better than expected numbers?
Yeah, consumption is substantially better, right? Consumption really outpaced the market expectation. For March, I think consumption coming in about 10+% year on year, right? So the consensus was looking for 7.5, and I think for the first 2 months it was like 4 and a bit. Right, so it's accelerating. Even though there may be some one-off factors here. For example, seasonality, and also, because if you look at the overseas experience, consumption, especially discretionary consumption, tend to be the first to recover and bounce back really hard in many of the overseas countries who were emerging out of the pandemic. So, there's some one-off factors here, but then at the same time, the May Golden Day holiday is here very, very soon. So we're seeing very strong booking in terms of hotel sales and also in terms of flights as well. So one shouldn't be too surprised. The consumption growth remains very strong going into the second quarter. So I would say that even though industrial production is very slow, and I think real estate investment actually surprised on the downside slightly, but consumption really is the one that saves the day.
Yeah, I've been having trouble booking flights for the May holiday as well. We'll talk more about consumption later in the program. But Jiahe, what's your take on this? Was the number also surprising for you? What do you think were the main reasons behind this strong GDP number for the first quarter?
Well, I think the number has actually surprised the market because the market actually gave a very kind of pessimistic view about the Chinese economic outlook. I remember at the end of last year, people were expecting the economy would grow like 5.5%. I thought, why is 5.5%? I mean, the long-term potential, economic growth potential for China is around 5 to 6%. It had a very bad 2022. So why would it be possible to be just 5.5% this year? So I would say the expectation was wrong in the first place. And then this first quarter GDP came out, especially the data in March looked like really promising, including like trade, consumption, like Hong Hao just said, also the investment as well. And I mean, everywhere looks quite promising. That's why we have saw the stock markets like Asia and Hong Kong have actually been rebounded quite a lot in recent quarters. Well, that's out of the expectation of the market, but I would say that the expectation was just too low in the first place.
So you were more optimistic all along, even before the numbers?
I was quite optimistic back a few months ago because I was always knowing that China's projected GDP is only $13,000. So when you look at that, I mean, South Korea is having like 30 to 35, Japan is like 40. So why would China always stay at the place where it's only 10 or 13,000 USD? That's not right. I mean, it's possible for China to catch the development level of these Asian countries in the long term. So you would say that China really has got a very large growth potential. So once the economic order is actually coming back after the COVID, you will see the rebound to be very quick because of this, comparatively speaking, low foundation of the economy. So I would say it's quite possible for you to see an economic surprise in China in this year.
And Hong Hao, now that the numbers are looking very promising, what do you think will happen in terms of policy reaction? We saw today that the LPR for 1 year and 5 year LPR were kept unchanged. Do you think there will be need for more policy stimulus, such as perhaps an LPR cut later on this year?
Yeah, well, I think the PBOC would be on hold for a little while now. Because since last October, if you look at the financial condition index, which measures interest rate level, money supply growth, and many other liquidity factors, financial conditions is actually quite loose. And also, if you look at the January and February data, and you can see that lending to business sector is actually one of the strongest in history. And also in March, the Chinese households start to borrow again, right? So that is a very nice surprise, pleasant surprise. And that correlates well with the consumption factor that we discussed just now. So I would say that, because policies work with a lag. So I would say for now, policymakers would be like on hold for some time, just to see how good the policy effect has been on the Chinese economy.
And Jiahe, we did see a triple R cut recently. Do you expect there's any more chance of policy easing, monetary policy loosening?
Well, I would personally to say that it looks to me that the monetary losing is temporarily at an end for the moment, because why there has been a lot of monetary stimulation is because in the first 2 months of this year, the January and February, economic growth was not very good. And in fact, the data in March was wonderful, but the data for the first 2 months, especially the January data, was not very good. It's because China has been fighting this 3-year-long battle against the COVID, and it's just coming out. So the economic growth was not very good at the beginning. So it was the role of the central bank, the PBOC, to stimulate the economy as much as possible, to use these tools, cutting the reserve requirement ratio, cutting interest rates, injecting a lot of liquidity into the market, these kind of things. But it's not an always. I mean, it's not going on forever. That the PBOC keeps on doing this even after the economy is going back to normal. So if you look at the economic data in March, I would say, well, when the back, the export is increasing. Some of the export sectors to certain markets are increasing at like double digits, 15%. Why keep on injecting liquidity into the market? That's probably enough, I would say, especially if we have even better data in April and May, then it is very possible that the injecting of liquidity into the market by the PBOC, the cutting of reserve requirement ratio, these kind of things would come to a temporary end for the moment.
Now, in terms of fiscal stimulus, Hong Hao, do you think the Chinese government will release extra stimulus to perhaps boost its infrastructure investments and consumption later on in the year? Because now we're seeing very strong consumption, but that might be a revenge shopping or revenge traveling. Will that be sustainable, right? So would there be more policy stimulus to make sure that this is sustainable?
I would say that if you really want to pump investment at this stage, it may not, work as well as you expected. As you know, the property sector is still trying to recover, and also FAI, fixed asset investments, in terms of infrastructure spending, it's actually quite high last year, right? So it's close to 10%, and also manufacturing investment has been rather resilient as well. It's also close to 10%. So I would say that right now, what is dragging down investment is really the property sector, and the property sector is somehow, still trying to emerge from the slump that we had like in the past 2 years. So it takes some time. If you look at in 2014, it takes about 3 quarters, almost 4 quarters, for the real estate sector to recover. And I would say that, this time around, we're facing an even more challenging situation. So I would just take some time and also, just wait patiently for household to borrow again, leverage up, and then start buying properties again.
Yeah. And Jiahe, what's your take on fiscal investment? Do you think there will be a lot more stimulus coming up later on this year?
Well, I would say that's probably very similar compared with the monetary policy. I mean, these kind of physical investment would be used when the economy is weak. When economic growth rate is not very good, especially because when you look at China's economic sector, the export and import is a very large sector. Okay, China is having 3 large economic sectors: investment, consumption, and trade. So trade is something that China cannot control on itself. I mean, we can control investment, we can stimulate our domestic consumption, but we can't control the trade all by ourselves. It has to depend on the economic situation in Europe, in North America, in South America, all these economic zones. So China has to reserve a lot of economic bullets for any possible things to happen. So fiscal policy is one of the tools that, especially when the economy is coming down. For example, there is another economic recession hitting the Eurozones, and the trade with China is coming down, then we use more fiscal stimulus to put up our consumption, these kind of things. So I would say currently it looks like everything is quite fine. So why keep on using the fiscal investment that has already been used for 3 years, in the past? So this year we have saw the fiscal subsidy to new energy cars, these kind of things has actually been reduced. That's a sign that the government is trying to reserve some of its fiscal bullets to face any possible problems that we might have in the future.
And now, while we're still talking about overall growth for this year, how is China positioned in achieving its around 5% growth target for the whole year? Shall we expect an upward revision from that number? We know Jiahe is very optimistic, so let's start with Hong Hao on the outlook.
Sure. I would say that going into the second quarter, more likely than not, we're going to accelerate. So, if consumption continues to be strong, and just now I mentioned that in March, households start to borrow again, right? So especially mid to long-term household lending is actually rising for the first time in a couple of months. And that's a really good sign, because mid to long-term lending is really mortgage, right? So people are actually buying again, buying properties again. So if consumption holds up well, right? So even though there's a revenge factor in the consumption figure, and then property sector start to sort of doing better than what it has been doing in the past couple of months, then I wouldn't be surprised to see Chinese GDP growth going into the 7% or more in the second quarter.
Wow, 7%. Jiahe, what's your expectation for overall GDP growth for the year?
Well, I would not say that 7% is not possible. That's possible. You might see a 7%. That's one reason, because we had a pretty low base for 2022. When we look at economic growth rate, it's not the economic level. It's actually called growth rate. Growth rate means you're comparing from last year. So if you had a very bad base for comparison, like 2022, then you will have a very high economic growth rate this year. So I would say, I would personally say that this year it's not hard for China's economy to reach its original target around 5 to 5.5%. Even 6% is actually quite possible for me to look for the whole year. Also, there is one thing that we have to make sure that China's export does not go anywhere wrong, and that also depends on how the economy will be going on in North America and Europe. But it looks like the trend is pretty good for the moment. If you look at the inflation data released by Canada in recent months, it has been dropping. While the inflation data in US looks like being under control. Also, the war in Europe looks like easing for the moment. Well, who knows what's coming out after 6 months, but it looks like the trend is pretty good for the moment. So if the economy turns back in Europe and America as well, then that will be even better news for the Chinese economy, because we are also doing a lot of trade with them.
Of course, hopefully that's the case. And Hong Hao, I think I cut you off earlier. You were talking about 7% for the second quarter, right? What about for the whole year?
For the whole year, I think it would be like substantially higher than 5%. So I think it was a low falling figure, as everyone can see it. And I think the first quarter surprise on the upside, 4.5% versus 4% expected by the market. So maybe like 7% plus for the second quarter. And going into the second half, recall I mentioned just now, property sector takes some time to recover, right? So in 2014. Takes about 3 to 4 quarters to recover. So I would say that going into the second half, if property sector really coming back to life, then I think let's say closer to 6% for the full year GDP growth is very achievable.
And speaking of the property sector, do you really expect that later on in the third, fourth quarter of this year, property sector? Are you expecting a strong rebound in China's property sector?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is in the first 2 months of the year, we're seeing in the tier 1 cities, second-hand properties has been selling through the roof. The growth has been very strong. Some people saying, wow, that's because Chinese households are trying to revenge buying, right? So revenge buying property, which is quite unlikely, because it's a very large purchase and it's a huge commitment for the entire household. So I really doubt that, right? So, if the second-hand market is doing well, and also, we know the Chinese culture. The Chinese culture is one that, people prefer new properties, because there's a usage limit of 70 years, and there's many other terms that make people prefer to buy a new property when they buy a new home. So let's imagine this, right? So people now is going for a lesser choice, right? So it's a second-hand property, it's
Right.
older. Yeah, so it's going against their preferences,
So it's
and it
because
is
of
still
demand.
doing very well. Yeah, it's still doing well. So I would say that I'm hopeful that property sector will take some time to recover, but eventually it will recover.
Yeah, I really doubt it's revenge spending as well on property. But what do you think are the factors behind this rebound in the first 2 months, considering the population growth is not as fast as people may hope, and is it because of a policy stimulus, because of loosening property controls?
Yeah, I think there are many factors at play here. I think firstly, the new housing inventory is very limited. And there's a sort of a lottery system, right, to determine who gets to buy the new properties, because there's a price limit put on top of those properties. And so when people buy a new property, not only they buy a newer property, but also they pay a lower price because of the price ceiling set by the local government. So that is why because there's a very limited inventory of new property and also limited purchase opportunity for people. So they have to go for the second-hand property, and I think that is a huge factor. Besides that, just now you mentioned that interest rate has been cut, and also especially mortgage rate has been cut, down payment requirement has been cut, and also purchasing limits in many of the cities has been loosened. So I would say that so many factors that is working for the property sector. So I would say that it is a genuine rebound in activities.
Yeah, because people tend to forget that there are so many property curbs on the Chinese property market, right? So the government has a lot of tricks actually in their bags when they want to boost or want the property market to kind of bounce back a little bit. Jiahe, I think you have last time we talked, you have a little bit different view on China's property market. What's your take now? Do you think it will rebound later this year?
Well, I don't know whether China's property market will rebound. I mean, China has actually relied on the growth of the property market for quite a long period of time. If you look at the past 2 decades, at least before 2017, the property sector has actually given a lot of support to China's economic growth. But the problem goes to be that the property price in the first tier cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen are really too expensive. I mean, if you compare the property price with either the rent or the average salary, it's just too high. I mean, if you look at that. So I would say we can't rely on the growth of the property market anymore in the future. And that's something the government has actually realized. And that's why, as you said, they have given so much curbs on the property market. I mean, that's why. I mean, if it's a promising industry with a low price, everyone can afford that, the rent is, comparatively speaking, the price compared with rent is not very high, then why not stimulate the property market? The reason that we have been putting so much curbs on the property market is because China has realized that we've got a bubble in the property sector, at least in the first tier cities. I mean, probably we don't include the third or fourth tier cities. The property price there are only like a few thousand yuan per square meter. It's not very high there. But if you look at first tier cities, they're just too expensive. So I think the government's intention, including the PBOC, the Ministry of Finance, to try to contain the property market at a place that does not go up too much, nor does it fall like 50%, like what we had in 1997 in Hong Kong. The property price fell by 70%, and that brings a destruction to the economy. We don't want that either. So it's more like the government tries to maintain the property sector within a small zone of fluctuation.
Hong Hao, do you think there's a property bubble in the first and second tier cities? You got to remember there are 1.4 billion people, and the infrastructure and everything in first tier cities are very attractive for all these people. Yeah. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a philosophical debate, right? I still remember.
I'm very curious.
Then, right? Yeah, 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago, we started to have this Chinese property bubble discussion, right? So every year we look at the Chinese property sector. Price has always been high, right? So except for 2008, price actually went down, slightly. But I think across so many years, for almost for every single year, the property price has been rising. And I think as a result, it's a one-way bet for many of the Chinese households. So, and also because this asset class price has been rising, so it is natural, to add on leverage. It's a one-way bet, right? So I think until today, the price to income ratio on the Chinese property is about 30 to 40 times. It is substantially higher than the US, for example. The US property price, even after a substantial rise, I think almost 50% rise in the past few years, it is still selling at about 14 times, right? So it's one of the highest in history, but 14 times versus 40, and you would say that the Chinese property is substantially more expensive. But having said that, one has to look closely to how you want to measure the property bubble. For example, there's a cultural factor here, right? So the Chinese households, for some reason, they love property, right? So if you ask them to buy shares, they will investigate, think about it, and then put 2,000 yuan into the stock market and try to play the lottery. But if you want them to buy a property, wow, they will go all out for it, right? So if conditions permit. So I would say that, yeah, you're right, Michelle, in the sense that, especially in tier one cities, we all know that these cities are getting the best educational resources, medical resources, healthcare, et cetera. Yeah. So it makes them very attractive for households, especially for young kids, to work and also look for opportunities in many of these big cities. And so, for example, in Tokyo, right? So after 1990, the Tokyo Japan property bubble burst. Even though the Tokyo property price plunged substantially, but the population of Tokyo is actually expanded more than double in the past 20 years. So it's just phenomenal. It really shows you how a modern metropolis can be a very attractive destination for younger people, and it still is today.
But do you think the low birth rate will affect the situation in the future? Because we know, as you said, Chinese people love buying property. But will that change for Gen Z and for the next generation? And when they get older, and there are a lot less of them, so what will happen then?
I think low birth rate is a global phenomenon, right? So it's not just a challenge that China is facing. If you look at the Southeast Asian countries, for example, Korea. The birth rate is lower than 1. I think Japan is very close to 1. And I think last year was a very unusual year in Chinese history in the sense that, we have a pandemic that is affecting many of the people. So people not in the mood to have kids, really. All right? And also, if you look at the marriage rate last year, marriage registration rate last year was plunged. Right? So it is a very unusual year. And as a result, the birth rate last year, was very low, and therefore, the Chinese population, for the first time in history, in modern history, actually declined last year. It's very unusual. So one should expect that this year, birth rate should somehow bounce back a little bit, because last year was unusual. And also, I think going forward, low birth rate is a global phenomenon. It is a product of economic development, human rights, and also equality between men and women. So it is a challenge that we are all facing.
And Jiahe, any quick thoughts on that?
Well, I would say if you look at the younger people, they really have a much less favor of the property market. That's because when they count that how much property they will get after their grandparents are passing away, and especially when their parents are passing away, when they go to the age of 60 or 70, they will see that they got a lot of property waiting for them over there. Because we had a very low birth rate in the past, past decade or 2 decades, because there's one-child policy that has been going on for quite a long period of time. So if you look at people like my generation, most of us don't have brothers or sisters, and we would have 3 or 4 properties when we become the oldest of the family. So that reduces a lot of the intention for the younger generation to keep on buying property. We see how much property we'll get. We will ask ourselves, how can I cope with 3 or 4 properties? That's not possible. So you have seen that the younger generation has actually tried to invest in other things, like in year of 2020 or 2019, a lot of them tried with mutual funds, and that really gives them a very bad experience because later on in 2021, 2022, the mutual funds actually fell a lot. So if you talk to the young people at the age of like 25, a lot of them have actually lost the money in this bear market. So that gives them a very bad experience, and they started feeling that, well, where can I really go after property? Because property market actually gives them a very good feeling about wealth. Well, the wealth effect. They keep on earning money. At least they don't lose a lot of money. But when they go to like foreign investment, they actually lost a lot in the past 2 years. But anyway, this can also change when we have another bull market. I mean, look at this year. Most of the funds have actually returned like 10 or 20%. So that actually brought the confidence backward. So if you look at this whole picture for the younger generation, it's really a mixed picture. On one hand is that they got enough properties, they don't want to buy property anymore, and the property price is actually too expensive for people to buy. You would like spend like 4 million for a down payment, and you would have a loan lasting for like 30 years. So it's actually too much for them to buy. On the other hand, they don't have really good investment targets anyway, and the worry that the inflation will kill their wealth in the next 3 or 4 decades. So people are really choosing at this moment. It's a mixed picture. But one conclusion can be made is that the younger generation are just not as much as their older generations to buy properties. They started to shift to other asset classes.
Yeah, this is a topic that can go on forever, but we do have to move on to the next section. Yes. So the National Bureau of Statistics reports that China's value-added industrial output expanded by 3% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2023. Production of new energy vehicles increased by nearly 23%, while solar panel production rose by over 53% compared to the same period last year. Now, these figures demonstrate that China's industrial sector is gaining momentum. So on this note, what do you guys think? To what extent does this 3% year-on-year expansion in China's value-added industrial output signify a recovery in the industrial sector? Hong Hao, let's start with you again.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it is slower than I thought. I thought it would be like closer to 5%. So it is not ideal. And also, the industrial production is trying to emerge from a huge slump in the last quarter of 2022. But if you look at the export figures, and also if you look at the PMI, especially if you look at the leading components of the PMI index, new order is up, exports order is up there, and the total evidence telling me that the Canton trade affair is going, receiving a very strong crowd as well. So I would say that, if you look at the exports growth in the month of March, I think it's growing at about 13 to 14%, right? So we basically surprised every single economist in the market. So that is telling us that, the trading partners are bounced back. So I would say that, maybe in the month of March, the industrial production had a little hiccup. But I wouldn't think that, one data point makes the trend. So one just have to wait and see, what will the industrial sector do in the coming months. But the leading indicators are looking up. And
Jiahe, was it also lower than your expectations?
Well, I would say I wasn't really expecting the industrial sector together with like investment to be performing really good this year because, if you look at last 1 to 2 years, the investment has actually taken a very important part in China's economy. That's used as a kind of fiscal tool to help the economy when we got, the consumption coming down because of the COVID and the export coming down because of the inflation and the war. So China invested really a lot in the past 2 years. So when you look at the year-over-year comparison of this year's, industry output, fixed asset investment, these kind of things, it's not supposed to be very good because they got a very high foundation in the first place. And that's also because the government tried to pull it back when the consumption is picking up and when the export is now turning out to be slightly better than expected. So it looks like the investment will not be as much as we have been doing the past 2 years. So it's quite right that we see that in the first quarter, the value adding growth would be slower than some of the expectation. I would say it's because the consumption and export are really picking upward. But one day when we have probably say a bad export someday in the future, then you will see the investment start to pick up again.
And what do you think these numbers imply in terms of demand and economic activities?
Well, I would say as long as the consumption is good, then you would not be worrying too much about the demand. Another thing with investment is that China has actually been using a lot of infrastructure investment in the past to counter the economic coming down, the lowering of the growth rate, these kind of things. So but this cannot go on forever because we have been building too much infrastructure somehow. I mean, if you look at the high-speed railroad, we have already completed the high-speed railroad in China. I mean, we're having the world's best high-speed railroad right now. I mean, you go from Beijing to Shanghai, it costs you like less than 4 hours, and the trip was stable. You are supposed to be arriving there at, for example, 13:41. You will be there at 13:41 exactly the minute. So that's a lot of investment that we have been doing. I mean, recently the government has withdrawn some of the investment projects for a lot of undergrounds in many cities who are all having like millions of people anyway, but the underground construction has actually been stopped. So that's why, I mean, we have to reserve some of the investment for the future one day if the economic growth comes downward.
Yeah, and Hong Hao, do you think the relatively modest number is reflecting slower demand or economic activities?
It is a consumption paradox, right? So if too many people go for consumption, then nobody's left to produce, right? So so this is always a balance, right? So Jiahe is right. Once the consumption growth starts to slow down, so people maybe go back to work and start to produce. We don't know, but I would say that the industrial production didn't have a really strong first quarter. But I don't think that the market was having a very strong expectation for this part of the economy, anyways. So I think one just have to wait out and see. I think as I said, the consumption paradox has that once people start to consume, then few people would be left to produce. So I think as a result, as time goes by, going into the second half of the year, we will look at better numbers.
But we did see an increase in new energy vehicle production and also solar panel production, pretty big numbers. Were they due to specific policy supports, or were they market forces?
Yeah, well, I think the Chinese electric cars are taking over the world, right? So the export numbers has been very strong. Even the domestic sales numbers have been very strong as well. And price continue to crash down, because many of the production facilities now come online. And now we're facing, a very large production capacity, not just for the domestic demand, but also for foreign demands, for exports as well. So if you look at, for example, BRD in Europe, so I heard that one of the hottest model, you have to wait in the queue for like up to 3 months, to get your hands on a car, right? So which is very, very popular because the battery was so good. It's fast charging. And one charge can go for like 800 to up to 1,000 kilometers on one charge. So it's just stunning. So I would say that the Chinese electric car industry is taking over the world. Because we have the technology know-how and also a whole bunch of production capacities that has already come online and that is ready to produce.
Yeah, Jiahe, do you want to add to anything to that?
Well, when we look at the electric vehicle, it's very hard to predict where it will be in the next many years. I mean, if you look at past 3 years, the electric vehicle has actually been stimulated strongly because, government has actually given a large subsidy to this industry. There are a few reasons. I mean, during the COVID period, when we had a coming down of the economic growth rate, it is right that government has to find a new growth engine for the economy, and that includes a lot of investment and new energy vehicle and solar power, solar panels, these kind of things is another part. So that government has given a lot of investment and subsidy into it, and we had a new energy vehicle industry that has been growing really fast if you look at past 3 years, and that also created a very bull market for relevant stocks in Asia and Hong Kong. But this year it comes to be a few things. First is that the economy is turning back, consumption is turning back, export is turning back. I mean, life is coming back to normal. So the government really can't keep on investing forever. I mean, otherwise it will be a government-controlled economy. Another thing is that now the new energy vehicle is already large enough. It's taking I think it's 40% of the new cars selling, and it's taking about 10% of the car reserving right now. So it's a lot of EVs on the street. So in the future, I think the government is now trying to say, okay, you're large enough, you are capable enough to work on your own. So it is now for the EV industry to prove by itself, to prove by the market that it is actually efficient enough to be a cornerstone for the economy, rather than something that keeps on living on the government subsidy. I mean, looking at the first 3 months, it looks like EV is actually still growing pretty good. So that's probably the market saying that we prefer the EV compared with the traditional cars, and the efficiency is actually quite good for us, at least in cities. One special thing for China to develop the EV is because I think it's about 60% of our population right now living in cities, and people don't travel to countryside too often as the people in the US would be doing. So that means automobiles in China does not have to travel a very long distance compared with US, or travel in very cold weather like in Russia. So that means probably the problem, the distance problem for EVs is not so significant in China. That's why we have a very good developing industry here.
Yeah, interesting view, and also the good prices also help a lot. Now let's talk more about consumption. As our guests have talked about, China's Q1 growth was fueled by a rebound in domestic consumption and supportive government policies. Total retail sales of consumer goods reached 11.5 trillion yuan, up 5.8% year-on-year, indicating that Chinese customers are spending again and contributing to the country's economic recovery. Additionally, online retail sales reached almost 3.3 trillion yuan, up 8.6%, highlighting the ongoing shift to online shopping. Now, Jiahe, I know you live in China. I'm not sure if you've traveled recently in China, but there are just people everywhere, right? If you go out, there are people traveling, going to restaurants after all these 3 years of strict COVID policies. But again, will that revenge traveling and spending wear off in the later part of the year?
Well, it looks like people are really traveling out. If you check the traveling data in the first 2 to 3 months, it's not yet recovered to the full extent of 2019. I think it's about 80 to 95% of 2019. It's almost there, but think about how much the economy has been developing in the past 3 years, how much the monetary base has also been expanding about 30 to 40%. So the money generated by the tourism industry is not yet fully recovered. But that's because of many things. I mean, people have actually given up a lot of traveling necessities in the past 3 years. For example, I read a report this morning said that the number of Chinese people traveling to South Korea and Japan is only I think it's about 10 to 20% of 2019, somewhere around that. And that's because many people have got their passport and visa expired. It takes time for you to go to reapply for a passport, reapply for a visa. It's something really takes time. It's not like, okay, we remove the COVID policy one day and next day everything goes back to normal. So if you look at the traveling right now, it's gradually recovering every single week. And in the coming holiday, that's 1st of May, there will be 5 days holiday for people. I talked to a friend of mine. She said she canceled her plan because it was too crowded. You can't book the ticket. You have to cost 4 times, 5 times more money than before. The hotel rents up 5 times straight away. And that's because many people are choosing to travel out. And the reason you see this significant rising in the price of air tickets and hotel fees is also because in the past 3 years, these industries have been stagnated. People don't build more hotels, people don't rent rent more homestays. They just say, okay, let's cope with cold market. So when this market is rebounding right away, I mean, after last November, and everyone is now planning to travel out, they don't find as many hotels rooms as they should be doing. It takes, I think, at least 6 months or even 9 to 12 months for the tourism industry to recover back. So this is only the first 3 months, and it's really a gradual process. People have to do a lot of things that are missed in the past 3 years.
Also, the availability of flights, right? There's still
Yeah, I mean,
quite a lot less.
Look at the flight companies. Many of their flights goes to be old in 3 years. Some of their flights, passing the serving age. I mean, usually you use like an airplane for like 10 to 15 years. So 3 years is enough for you to pass out like 15% of your flights. So that means China have to keep on buying and building more new flights. We have saw that China signed a very large order with Europe a few weeks ago, and that's because we lacked the buying of these flights for 2 or 3 years. So that takes time for everything to come back to normal. I mean, especially for the tourism industry.
Definitely. Hong Hao, you live in Hong Kong, right? Are you seeing a lot more mainland tourists lately? Is it back to the pre-pandemic levels?
Probably not quite back to the pandemic level just yet. If you look at the busy streets in Kowloon, the shopping paradise for mainland tourists, and also along the central Wan Chai Causeway Bay area, you're still not getting the usual traffic jam, as back then. Right? So things are coming back, but slowly. I think also one of the reasons why hotel rates are so expensive. If you come to Hong Kong, I think a 5-star hotel easily costs you $1,000 per night. Right, wow. So it is because the capacity has run out. All right, so during pandemic, many of the hotel staff actually left the industry. And we know that many of the hotel staff actually came from Southeast Asia countries. So they went back. So now that we have to retrain them, and also make the room availability to go up as fast as possible. But still, despite all these efforts, the room rate is still very expensive. There's just not enough rooms and hotel staff to go around. I think things takes time. And also, if you look at the household savings in China, right? So in the month of March, we saved a substantial amount. I think it's like for last year, it's about 18 trillion yuan new savings in the bank accounts, and that is like 80 to 90%, almost double the usual average amount annual savings, which is about 8 to 9 trillion yuan. So I think consumption is a function of income, and also so a function of propensity to consume, and also a function of income. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the income level, I think the youth unemployment amongst the young Chinese people are still quite high. I think it's almost close to 20%, and that is according to official figures. So that needs to be addressed as well. So if income cannot recover to the pre-pandemic level or even higher than that, and also because 3 years of hardship, people's propensity to consume is actually lower than before, then very easily after this one-off bump post-pandemic, we'll be back into the sort of a more slow in terms of our consumption patterns. So those are the things that we have to watch out.
Right. Basically, so you're saying that people do have savings from the past 3 years to spend.
Yeah, but they're not willing to spend for some reason. I think the household savings is still surging in the banking system. Right. For some reason.
Right. So they're not feeling secure enough, I guess, to spend the savings for some reason.
Yeah, I think so. And also, just now we discussed the property sales figure. Mm-hmm. So in 2021, so 2 years ago, and that was the peak of property sales ever. That is about 18 trillion yuan for 2021. And I think many of the industry experts that I talked to regarded that number, 18 trillion yuan, as like the pinnacle of Chinese property sales for like many years to come. So I think last year we sold about 12 trillion yuan worth of property sales. And this year, we are still wobbly. So as a result, you can see that the households are not buying as much property, and therefore the savings in the banking account is actually surging up. So those are the factors that we have to watch out for, because if people buy a new property, they tend to spend after the property purchase, right? So they buy new home allowances, refurbishments, and all that stuff. So that is why I think the property sector holds the key to this year's economic performance.
Very interesting. Yeah, has a lot to do with also employment, right? Do people are they expected to make more money so they feel comfortable spending as well?
Yeah, that's right. I think just now I mentioned that the youth unemployment is about 20%, close to 20%.
Oh wow. Okay.
So even though nowadays there's like so many ways for younger people to make money, right? So they can be key opinion leaders on the internet. They can make vlogs and post it and to earn advertisement fees from merchants, etc., etc. But still, it's not comparable to having a stable job, stable income, right? So especially like when you want to buy a new house to start your own family, the bank would ask you, what kind of job do you do, right? So how stable is your income, that kind of stuff. So it is a whole series of questions that one has to consider. So I would say that, I think the youth employment situation needs to be paid more attention to and need more policy to support.
And Jiahe, what's your take on post-pandemic employment in China? Because obviously it has a big impact on consumption, especially going forward.
I think I don't really have any worrying about the employment issue this year because, when we look at last year, we have been relying a lot on investment to boost the whole economy, and that really has a problem with employment because when you look at the three economic sectors, investment would be the sector that actually employs the least amount of people with producing a same amount of GDP. Export is like in the middle, and the consumption industry is where for producing a certain amount of GDP, you employ a lot of people, especially you employ a lot of unskilled people. I mean, for example, if you talk about investment into, for example, a nuclear station, you have to employ specialists. You can't employ ordinary people over there. You have to employ many people who work in this industry. But when you talk about consumption, you talk about tourism industries, then you really employ ordinary folks. Anyone who can stand behind the stall would be able to serve a consumption industry. The training for labor in consumption industry is actually one of the minimum. So when the consumption is picking back, the tourism industry, the restaurant, the filming, all these industries are coming backward. You see that they started to employ a lot of people, especially the employment of youngsters. So this is something that I'm not worrying this year regarding employment, basically because the consumption and tourism, this kind of industry are coming back.
And do you think the strong consumption numbers in the first quarter, was it purely due to demand, or has a lot to do with government-supported policies? And if the latter one, do you think, what kind of policies do you think need to be in place later in the year to maintain this momentum?
Well, I would say the rebound of consumption is somewhere mostly attributed to the demand of the economy. I mean, the economy is coming back. I mean, consumption is somewhere the government's role is really hard to perform. I mean, the government would be very good at increasing investment. For example, we start projects to build like 1,000 kilometers of high-speed railroad. We start building like 20 airports, these kind of things. It's really easy for them to do that. We start like 5 more nuclear plants. I mean, if you look at the nuclear industry, we started I think it's about 20 nuclear plants building in the past few years. So I mean, government is good at doing this, but consumption is talking about millions or even a billion people's daily job. I mean, how can you say, okay, we're going to invest 3 billion into the restaurant industry in Changsha? You just can't do that. It's a lot of people running out every single night to find something they can consume. Every transaction is like tens of yuan. You just can't do that with government's role. So it's the government has actually been doing a lot of things in order to stimulate the consumption. When you look at the local governments, they build fairs, they give subsidies, they give coupons, these kind of things. They reduce taxes for restaurants. insurance, these kind of things. They have been doing a lot of things. But when you talk about the whole consumption industry, it's actually because the economy is coming back. Everyone is going out of their doors. Everyone's traveling. They're consuming. They're spending their money. They're not keep on saying, okay, we probably will have less business in the coming few months because of COVID policies, so we can spend now. When they spend more money in their daily lives, people will get more money, and people get more money, they spend more money. So it's like a circulation goes on. So this is something that we can see for the consumption industries, because people are coming back to consume. The government has helped this, but it's not because the government has helped this alone that this consumption industry is coming back.
And Hong Hao, as the numbers we just saw, online consumption growth was at 8.6%, which is a lot faster than offline. Do you think this fast growth in online consumption will continue even after the pandemic? And how might this trend impact the traditional retail sector in China?
Yeah, well, it is faster than expected. But having said that, though, if you look at the growth rate figure, right, for the past 10 years, you can see a dramatic deceleration in terms of online sales growth. Because now a lot of transactions are done online, so the base effect is wearing off. So I think very high single-digit online sales growth is a very strong number that we can live with. Yeah. I think going forward, one shouldn't be too surprised to see online shopping facilities taking over many of the traditional outlets. Right? So even in the cities such as Shanghai, Zhengda Guangchang, for example, is a prime example. Right? So it was located at the city center, used to be like the prime attraction for many people, including tourists. But now, if you go into the Zhengda Guangchang, you see, the foot traffic is like minimum, right? So after 8 o'clock in the evening, the place goes completely dark, right? So there's just no one there. But if you recall, less than 3 years ago, there's even an IMAX theater in the Zhengda Guangchang. So things has changed dramatically, and also I think as a result, the way how people conduct business has changed as well. For example, leasing rate for some of the offline shopping malls has plummeted, because of the foot traffic. So I think there's a huge sort of a divergence in the sense that some of the shopping malls are still doing okay. Those are the aggregators that is tracking most of the foot traffic offline. But I think as time goes by, one shouldn't be too surprised to see shopping activities move online. Very similar to what Amazon has done for the U.S. economy.
Yeah. Jiahe, quick thoughts, anything to add to that?
Sorry, what's the topic again? I was running out of my mind just now.
So we're talking about how online retail sales are growing a lot faster than offline. Will this trend continue? Will it eventually take over? Or what impact will this have on the offline retail sales in China?
It's quite possible. I mean, if you look at the growth rate of online selling, it has been really outpaced the offline for years, and I think that's a choice of the market. People just feel it's much more convenient to buy on internet, and they get cheaper price, they get better quality, these kind of things. And currently, if you look at the whole market, there has been from like Jingdong, Taobao, Douyin, Pinduoduo, all these kind of companies running into it. You have multiple choices, and they started competing with each other. So I would say it's quite possible you see this trend continue in the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. But this trend will one day reach an end. I mean, it's not going on forever. I mean, otherwise everyone will be buying everything on internet in the future. So that I think we'll probably see a stopping of the growth rate in the next 5 to 10 years. But currently, it looks like the trend is still going on pretty fast. You can easily tell this by looking at the financial statement of all these listed companies. They have, marvelous growth compared with other retail companies.
All right. And last but not least, let's talk about China's foreign trade. So China's foreign trade volume reached nearly 10 trillion yuan in Q1, up 4.8% year on year, demonstrating the resilience of the Chinese economy against growing external uncertainties despite global volatility. Now, this increase includes an 8.4% rise in exports and a 0.2% growth in imports. So now, let's talk about these numbers. How has China managed to maintain this resilient foreign trade volume, despite all these external uncertainties? Hong Hao.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you look at the geographical breakdown of the trade figure, right? So exports to U.S. and also to the European countries, they're declining slightly, but then the exports to the ASEAN countries and also the APEC countries are rising substantially.
Yeah.
Right. So this is because the global supply chain has changed. Right. So if you look at the trend in the past couple of years, Chinese exports to the ASEAN countries and also to the APEC country has been rising steadily. And until now, it is actually, as a percentage of total Chinese exports, it's actually higher than the exports to the U.S. And also the export goods, the composition has changed as well. So now that we're exporting more value-added goods, more sophisticated goods to the other countries. Right? So this is very, very different from 10 years ago, when China is exporting umbrellas, lighters, clothing, that kind of stuff, very low value-added stuff. So that's very nice for a change. And I think, sitting in this part of the world, I think every single economy, how strong we all hope that this will continue, because for this year, for 2023, most of us has discounted exports as one of the drivers for this year's growth. But now that we're actually getting help from exports, and hopefully property comes back, consumption stays strong, then we will have a really good year in 2023.
Yeah, let's all hope that. Jiahe, what do you think are behind the 8.4% increase in exports, and which industries or sectors do you think are driving this growth?
Well, I think Hong Hao said is right. I mean, China's trade with Asian countries is really helping this export. I mean, we have not been given a lot of expectation for China's trade this year because we have seen inflation still going on in US and in Canada, and you still have the war in Europe. But China's trade with Asian countries is now the largest of China's trading partners. I think it's about 50% more than the second largest one, that is the Eurozone. Well, 30% larger. So another reason for China's exports to grow so quick is because ASEAN countries are relatively less developed compared with North America or Europe. So that means they have high economic growth rate, and China's trade with them increase every single year when their economy is growing and when the Chinese economy is growing as well. Another reason supporting China's international trade is because we have more technology adding in our trading right now. I mean, if you look at our exports these years, that start to contain more things like new energy products, new energy vehicles, automobiles, computers, mobile phones, all these kind of things, rather than just the simple products like before, clothes, shoes, furniture, those kind of things. Also, the Chinese brands are started to be recognized in the international market, rather than just selling raw products. We now have more brands coming upward, especially when you look at China's mobile phone companies and automobile companies. They start to their brands are starting to be recognized, at least in developing economies. So that means China will have more income coming from export in this area. So that's why we keep on saying that technology is really important for China's growth in the next 2 to 3 decades. I mean, we can't keep on doing what we have been doing in the past 4 decades. We have to do something new, something more value adding, and something with actually more technology.
And looking at the import numbers, which is significantly lower, right, 0.2% growth in imports, was that due to any specific trade barriers or any domestic issues?
Well, I think who is supposed to answer? Okay. Okay, let me answer that. Well, that's probably one thing. I mean, if as you mentioned, the trade barrier is not happening, then China definitely import much more things. That's the right thing. The trade barrier that has been set to China, especially for like chips, the equipment used to produce chips, these kind of things, is really stopping China's import. But on the other hand, it also stimulated China's investment and domestic consumption, because we start to build these things in our own market. Yeah, Hong Hao.
Hong Hao, please add to that.
Yeah, we'd love to see more imports. Because as part of the value chain, especially the semiconductor and electronics value chain, is a very long, sophisticated value chain. For example, iPhone takes about 1,400 parts, right, to manufacture one iPhone. Right, so I think importing from foreign countries really feeding into this sophisticated value chain. So I think imports is a very important component. I would love to see it to be higher than 0.2%.
Yeah. There's just so much to talk about, but unfortunately we are running out of time. But like our guests have just talked about, let's hope that China's exports remain strong and property sector bounces back, and also consumption momentum stays strong. Thank you so much for our guests, Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novem Arcae Technologies, and Hong Hao, Chief Economist of Grow Investment Group. Thank you so much for talking with us today. And this is it for this edition of Biz Talk. I'm Michelle Vandenberg in Beijing. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.